There are no shortcuts to economic growth. It will take long-term decisions. It will take hard yards. It will take time for the reforms that we are introducing to be felt in the everyday economy.
No shortcuts. But how much patience will Rachel Reeves' party and Labour voters have with the government strategy? Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Welcome to the programme. After what's been an eventful week for the government, a hard week for the government, it feels like every hard-fought gain has received pushback. And even though we've had this range of economic data which had lots of things to be positive about, there's also an underside to most of it, which actually doesn't paint such a rosy picture either. No sooner had Rachel Reeves clawed the public finances back into a better position, restoring her £9.9 billion of fiscal breathing room, than Bloomberg's analysis found that half of that had vanished due to market moves.
Yeah, and on the economic data front, of course, our specialist subject, retail sales weren't as bad as feared. Inflation also cooled this week in the latest data. But then consumers are still really cautious. In terms of spending, that has actually grown by less than real income. So you've got an increase in the savings rate. The broader kind of GfK measure of consumer confidence still shows that consumers are quite glum. The data's stuck below the 10-year average.
And then inside the government, we know there's been considerable disquiet about the welfare cuts as well. Ministers privately warning that the budget reductions will negatively impact services. And we had a headline then that the resignation of Number 10's Director of Communications, Matthew Doyle, after 9 months in the job as well. So in some ways it feels like with every step forwards, there's maybe 2 steps back.
Yeah. Possibly. Let's bring in Bloomberg's opinion columnist, Rosa Prince, to discuss and think about what's been going on in what has been a huge week for the government. Rachel Reeves got her headroom back in the spring statement, barely. Markets accepted it. Is her position any stronger now than it was a week ago?
I'm not sure that it is, actually, Caroline. I think it is a little bit weaker. As you say, she had to really scramble at the last minute as well to kind of get her headroom back. At the last minute, the OBR stepped in. They said, we're not going to score the welfare cuts that you've put forward as high as you think they are. And then she sort of went off and cut a bit more and found a bit more. So it didn't give an impression of stability. That headroom is very fragile. It's the same amount that got knocked off course last time around. And already it's being battered by Donald Trump's tariffs, which he announced within hours of her sitting down. And a lot of people are saying she's kind of in this doom loop now where she's every 6 months or so going to have to do a bit of fiddling to keep herself on course for her precious fiscal rules. And that's not a very stable way to be running an economy.
Well, especially when we know that there's been so much controversy in the Labour Party and in parts of the public as well about the cuts to welfare. I mean, the government really wants to focus their message on their priorities, growing the economy. We've heard it over and over again. But are Labour MPs going to forget things like the welfare cuts that easily?
Well, a lot of the things that she says will save money are quite far down the road. So, as you say, she's cut the welfare budget and the big line is, well, we're going to help people get back into work. That doesn't happen overnight. That's a long-term project. She's also talking about growth being a means that the economy can get stronger and therefore Labour can start to spend money on the things that they want to do. That growth is driven by things like the planning reforms, which she was happy to say that the OBR were scoring. But again, if you loosen up planning, you're allowed to build, say, a new home, that takes a while. So you don't begin to see the benefits till quite late in the parliamentary term. And the question is whether her colleagues are willing to wait that long, or whether they're unhappy now with what their constituents are telling them about the impact of these cuts.
Yeah, in terms of sort of 1 brick forwards and 2 bricks backwards, I mean, only look at Bloomberg's Damien Shepherd, his piece this morning, where he's actually spoken to the half dozen home builders in the UK. When you think about that planning reform and the big ambition of 1.5 million homes, Damien has pointed out in the statements released from the biggest UK home builders that they're not planning on delivering the number of homes that the government wants to see, you know, something like a 25% shortfall this year. So, as I say, you know, very difficult, and every win is sort of snatched away. the tariff issue, another huge one, isn't it? Car makers said that they were disappointed but not surprised by the 25% US tariffs. Rachel Reeves and the government has talked about these intensive negotiations and discussions with the US, but they don't seem to have borne fruit.
Yeah, ever since Donald Trump came in, the government strategy has been to kind of cross their fingers and hope. And they talk about having a good relationship. They have not been critical of the Trump administration at all. And the thinking is, well, if we're nice to him, perhaps he'll carve out a little exception for the UK. The moment of truth will come next week on what Trump is calling Liberation Day. They've got 4 or 5 days left to make the argument. It doesn't look as if it's working so far. If they could, I think that would be a huge coup for Starmer and for this strategy of playing nice. We'll just have to wait and see. I
mean, is that the next major speed bump that we need to be worried about for this government? You know, obviously it could have huge implications for the fiscal headroom if it has a move across markets as a result of those tariffs as well. But in terms of the stability of the government and them keeping to the plan, as they keep telling us, no shortcuts, long-term strategy, you know, what's the thing that could throw it off?
Yeah, I think that does begin to feel a bit tense if Donald Trump does turn around and say, no, I'm sorry. I don't get a great deal of sense from Labour MPs that they're particularly upset about Donald Trump and the attitude towards him in the way that perhaps there was the first time around where Labour MPs did sort of mouth off. The MPs I speak to are a bit more calm about it. Maybe we're all a bit more used to it. I definitely think the welfare issue is the big problem. There will have to be legislation on this, and we're already starting to see a few murmurs of rebellions. Now, Labour has this massive majority, so it's very unlikely to win, but they're not going to want to be seen to be losing MPs this early on. Other problems I see coming down the track, perhaps immigration. Labour is very alive to the threat of reform. Nigel Farage said yesterday that he expects to be Prime Minister after the next election. And he also said people used to laugh at him when he said that. They're not laughing anymore. Labour's taking that very seriously. So the party is coming up with some ideas. One is to, again, go for some kind of offshoring scheme for processing immigrants. That's a bit like the Rwanda scheme that the last Conservative government went for, which Labour MPs are going to find really challenging. They're not going to like that one.
Yeah, in terms of Farage, is that a significant threat, do you think? I mean, we're so far out from another election. And I remember before last year's election talking to a lot of business people. They were very hopeful about a two-term government, you know, sort of quite certain in some ways that it would be a two-term administration. Is there some doubt about that, do you think?
I don't think any of the other parties, from what I can see at the moment, will be strong enough by the time of the next election to seriously challenge Labour, certainly not reform. But what you could see is, if the Tories don't recover, is reform getting much stronger. They've only got 5 seats, remember, at the moment. Perhaps they go on and get 90, 100 seats, and then you begin to get the kind of fragmentation of British political parties that you see much more across Europe, even under our first past the post system, which is kind of designed for two-party politics. That isn't the case anymore. The first test of this, as you say, the general election is a long way away, but we're having local elections in May. There's now, just yesterday it was confirmed that there's going to be a by-election on May 1st where Reform really fancy their chances. And yes, Downing Street are worried about this. Reform came second to Labour in about 90 seats, and I think that's concerning them much more than actually the Tories, who don't seem to be doing very much at all at the moment.
Could there be the same fragmentation within the Labour Party? Is actually the biggest threat to the government from disquiet among its own MPs?
What's really interesting about this disquiet that you describe is that it's not from the usual suspects. It's not just from the left wing, the kind of leftovers of the Jeremy Corbyn era. It's some of those new MPs who are pretty centrist. So I think on most policies, they're behind Starmer, they agree with it. They see, you know, they're pretty sensible. They see the challenges that they're facing. They just really find these welfare cuts tough because they themselves came into politics to help the poor. That's kind of Labour's raison d'etre. That's why many of them joined the Labour Party. So I think they're going to want to see something, whether it's on perhaps ending the 2-child benefit limit, doing something for pensioners to make up for those winter fuel payment cuts that were so unpopular last summer. So I think they will be pushing, and if Number 10 is sensible, they'll probably have to listen and do something.
But it's immensely difficult for the government to deliver if you don't increase economic growth, if you don't increase living standards. 0.1% in terms of economic growth, which was the most recent figure for the GDP that we had out today. You can't deliver unless you do that. And so there's huge pressure to find that driver of economic growth and to get the message across. I mean, Number 10's just lost Starmer's director of communications. He stepped down. You know, he is a veteran comms director and was in the Tony Blair era too, and was sort of considered a sort of safe pair of hands. But it's about implementation, of which is still a major pressure on the government, and then it's about how you get that message out there.
Yeah, and the comms challenge is really hard going forward, particularly as I spoke about earlier. The next 6 months are all going to be about what does Rachel Reeves do in her budget, particularly talking about the challenges you were mentioning there. Will she raise taxes? They went into the election saying that they wouldn't. Is she going to say, look, everything's changed because of Donald Trump, because of Ukraine? And that they are going to have to do their best to keep a control of the narrative, to set the pace, to get the conversation being the way they want it to be. And I don't know, I'm assuming that the feeling was that they hadn't done a very good job of doing that previously, and I wonder if that's why Matthew Doyle has left. The person who's now in charge, a man called James Lyons, who was a former lobby journalist, so I knew him then. He is seen as perhaps having better relationships with the media, and I wonder if that's something going forward that seemed to make sense for them to shake up that team.
OK, something to watch. Rosa Prince, Bloomberg opinion columnist, thank you so much for joining us. You can read Rosa's latest writing at bloomberg.com/opinion. Caroline, I mean, look, this is a position where we're looking at the government in sort of the same precarious dilemma it was a week ago, despite everything that's happened in the past week, and a very uncertain week ahead.
Hugely uncertain. Tariffs are looming. The whole of Europe is waiting to see what happens with this so-called Liberation Day. Doesn't look like many are going to get exceptions to that, although a lot of industry people are still hoping that the tariffs will be temporary. But then, as Rosa says, the discussion around taxation, I mean, began before the spring statement, as soon as she had finished speaking, and I'm sure into the next few months there'll be discussion about whether the Labour Party will have to raise taxes.
Well, that's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe. Give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and our audio engineer was Peter Nicolino. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. We'll be back next week with more. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.